Your ancestors ate tastier food than what you eat today. There was no electricity, no gas, not even matches. Yet Native Americans managed to produce perfectly cooked meals using nature's laws. Their cooking method seems physically impossible, until you realize the intelligence behind it. Long before gas grills and modern kitchens, they mastered controlling flames with nothing but stones, sticks, and impeccable intuition. These weren't just backyard barbecue pits. We're talking about advanced cooking systems that fed entire communities without a single metal cooking vessel. Most meals were prepared outdoors where smoke could disperse, and multiple families shared the workspace. Campfires were common, but anyone who sat around one knows how smoky indoor fires can be. The trick was lighting fires that were hot but burned clean. Small dry sticks provided cooks with precise heat control better than big logs. But here's where it gets interesting. Animal dung wasn't something to avoid stepping on. Buffalo chunks and dried deer droppings were excellent steady, slow-burning fuel for long cooking sessions. Makes sense when you think about it, right? These materials were everywhere, burned cleanly, and provided consistent heat for hours. The real genius was the setup. One fire could handle multiple cooking tasks simultaneously. While meat cooked on one side, vegetables steamed in nearby bark containers. Different heat zones around the fire transformed each cooking area into a primitive but effective stove. Weather played a major role in how these kitchens operated. In winter, cooking meant lighting fires indoors or building windbreaks to protect flames from harsh elements. Summer setups spread out over a wider area to take advantage of warmer temperatures and longer daylight hours. Some tribes even had seasonal cooking sites they returned to each year. Wind patterns and natural shelters made fire management easier. Lighting these fires took real skill. Without matches, you had to rely on flint and steel or create sparks by striking two stones together, a tougher method. Dried plant fibers, reed fluff, or shredded bark would catch these tiny sparks and turn them into flames. One wrong move and you'd be back to rubbing sticks together. The whole system worked because everyone understood fire behavior, which woods burned hottest, how to accumulate coals for cooking overnight, and when to add fuel without smothering flames. It wasn't just about making dinner. In harsh environments, a failed cooking fire meant the difference between a feast and starvation. The strange thing is, once a fire burned strong, real cooking magic could begin, with tools that would impress modern campers. Forget fancy skewers or gas grills. Native Americans cracked the art of stick cooking thousands of years before ever thinking of patenting barbecue forks. They'd take whatever meat, fish, or roots they had and skewer them on sharpened sticks. Simple. Absolutely. Effective? Definitely. The secret wasn't just stabbing food randomly. These people knew exactly which sticks yielded the best results. Green would burn slowly, while types like willow would bend without snapping when turned over fire. Hunters peeled bark off sticks, sharpened one end to a fine point, and threaded deer meat or whole fish as if making the world's first kebab. But here's where it gets clever. Rotating the spit wasn't mindless. You had to turn it at just the right speed to cook evenly without charring one side or leaving the inside raw. Too fast, and the outside remained raw while the inside burned. Too slow, and you'd get tough, dry meat that could break your teeth. Some groups even made temporary spit rotators from leather straps. One strap end tied to the stick, the other to a bent branch, creating tension that slowly turned the meat without constant manual effort. A brilliant bit of engineering using only animal hide and wood. Small game like rabbits or birds was treated like royalty. Instead of chopping them up, they skewered whole animals and leaned them next to hot coals. Heat reflected off nearby rocks created an outdoor oven effect, cooking everything perfectly. No metal, no electricity, no propane tanks. Native stick cooking had a practical side modern campers still haven't solved. When hunting miles from home, you couldn't carry your kitchen with you. Cooking on sticks meant eating fresh meat right where you caught it. No spoilage, no waste, no heavy pots to haul through thick forests. Different tribes had their own twists on the basic technique. Some created steam pockets by wrapping fish in wet leaves before skewering to keep it moist. Others cooked multiple small skewers at once instead of one big stick, feeding large groups efficiently. The beauty of this approach was speed and flexibility. One person tended the fire while others prepared different skewers with various foods. One stick held roots, another fish, maybe deer meat threaded with wild onions. Everything cooked at once, but each ingredient got exactly the treatment it needed. Of course, stick cooking was only the start of fire mastery. When they really wanted to heat things up, they discovered something even more creative than pointed sticks. Ever heard of boiling water without a pot? Native Americans invented it thousands of years ago, and honestly, it's pretty ingenious. They heated stones in the fire until red hot, then dropped them directly into water-filled containers. The water would bubble and hiss like a science experiment. But here's the twist, these weren't metal pots. They used bags made from animal hides, waterproof baskets, or hollowed-out logs. Drop a heated stone into one of these makeshift vessels and boom, seconds later you had boiling soup. Sounds crazy, right? Until you realize it works better than you think. The secret was keeping everything moving. A single stone heated the water but cooled quickly. Smart cooks heated multiple stones simultaneously and rotated them like a team. Hot stones going in, warm stones coming out. This way, without fancy equipment, stews simmered for hours. Then there's stone selection, which was more important than it seemed. Drop the wrong stone in boiling water and it cracks or even explodes. Not what you want at dinner time. Tribes learned by trial and error which stones worked best. Soapstone became the gold standard because it retained heat forever and rarely broke. Granite? Forget it. Too likely to shatter. Limestone was risky too. But find good soapstone or certain sandstones and you'd cook with reliable heat that won't blow up in your face. This method speed outpaced other cooking techniques. While frying on a stove took all day, stone boiling could make hot soup in minutes. Perfect for hunter groups returning late or when weather turned suddenly bad. Some tribes got so good they'd time everything perfectly to heat different ingredients at once, making complex stews with many components. Meat in a hide pouch, vegetables in another, all bubbling from rotating hot stones. Camps would smell amazing in minutes. What's crazy is how this technique probably spread among tribes who never even met. From Arctic communities to desert dwellers, everyone seemed to discover hot stones plus water's instant cooking power. Our modern kitchens have forgotten other simple solutions that amaze us today. Speaking of forgotten methods, there's another even more surprising one. A technique turning ashes and coals into nature's perfect oven. Ever wonder how Native Americans cooked without a single oven? They turned fires into their own ovens. Hot coals and ashes became secret ingredients behind some of the tastiest cooking methods you've never heard of. Here's where it gets smart. Instead of building fancy cooking structures, tribes wrapped fish, sweet potatoes, corn, and other foods in big green leaves. Think of it like nature's aluminum foil but way better. These leaf packages were buried right in hot coals and covered with a thick layer of ash. The ash acted as insulation, creating a soft, even heat that cooked food slowly and thoroughly. Why ash? Ash proved to be nature's perfect cooking environment. It keeps heat for hours without burning the food inside. The temperature stayed steady like a slow cooker made from fire leftovers. Plus, cooking in ash gave food a smoky flavor you can't get from modern ovens. The weird part was how moist everything stayed. You'd think burying food in what's basically fire dust would dry it out completely. No way. Leaf wraps trapped steam inside, keeping fish tender and roots perfectly soft. Some tribes even figured out that certain ashes worked better than others. Hardwood ash was gold because it burned cleaner and lasted longer. Then there was speed. While stone boiling took time to heat stones, cooking in ash happened fast. Hunters could catch a fish, wrap it in leaves, bury it in yesterday's campfire coals, and have dinner by sunset. No prep time, no fancy gear, just earth and simple, effective cooking. Different tribes got creative with wrapping. Some used corn husks for smaller pieces while others preferred wide leaves from local plants. The Pueblo people mastered roasting corn so well that some villages still use the technique in traditional ceremonies today. Makes sense, right? These cooking methods weren't just survival tactics. They were carefully developed techniques producing genuinely delicious food. Modern chefs are rediscovering ash cooking, but mostly in controlled restaurant settings rather than real campfires. Sure, ash cooking worked great for individual meals and small groups. But what about when entire families needed to eat together or tribes threw big feasts? That called for thinking bigger, digging deeper, and creating something that could feed dozens at once. When you had to feed 50 people, a small fire pit wasn't enough. Native North American tribes mastered the art of earth oven cooking. Basically, they turned the ground itself into a massive slow cooker that could roast a whole deer, dozens of fish, or mountains of corn and vegetables. The process started with serious digging. Men dug pits 3 to 8 feet wide and several feet deep, depending on how many mouths needed feeding. But here's what got clever. They didn't just throw food into the dirt and hope for the best. First came a carefully selected layer of stones. Not any rocks would do because some would explode when heated quickly. These stones were tossed into a roaring fire built right inside the pit and heated for hours until glowing like tiny suns. Meanwhile, food prep happened above ground. Deer quarters wrapped in wet hides, whole turkeys stuffed with wild rice, ears of corn still in their husks. When the stones reached scorching temperatures, the real choreography began. Hot coals and stones formed the base layer. Then wet leaves or hides went on to create steam. Food was layered carefully, dense root vegetables closer to the heat, more delicate fish or birds toward the top. Green branches, wetter hides, and finally soil sealed everything tight. Then came the hardest part, waiting. These underground feasts cooked anywhere from 6 to 24 hours depending on contents. The earth acted as insulation, keeping heat steady while slowly breaking down tough fibers and blending flavors. Some tribes even built small fires on top of the covered pit for extra heat. The results were legendary. Meats fell off bones. Vegetables turned silky soft. And everything carried that unique smoky, earthy flavor you can't replicate any other way. Plus, having so much food meant large families could feast together and there'd be enough leftovers to keep everyone full for days. Different regions developed signature touches. Coastal tribes added seaweed layers for extra minerals and ocean flavor. Prairie groups mixed in wild onions and sage. Mountain tribes used pine needles for a sharp, echoing note. But the real genius was more than just cooking. It was social engineering. These huge earth ovens brought communities together, preparing, waiting, and finally launching magnificent feasts. You can't help but wonder how they coordinated such detailed cooking without burning everything to coal. Speaking of avoiding disasters, not everyone had access to proper digging spots or enough people for large cooking projects. Clay wasn't exactly Amazon Prime delivery back then, but it was definitely better than trying to boil water with bare hands. Southern tribes became clay cooking wizards, turning mud into heat-resistant pots. The Cherokee and Creek people harvested specific clay types mixed with crushed shells or sand, then crafted handmade vessels big enough to feed whole families. No potter's wheel involved, just skillful fingers and knowledge passed down by grandmothers about how thick the walls needed to be. But clay wasn't the only game in town. Coastal tribes looked around and said, why make pots when the ocean already made them? Giant seashells made perfect boiling containers. Turtle shells worked even better. Huge, naturally waterproof, and equipped with their own built-in handles. Makes sense, right? These shells could hold gallons of soup and withstand the heat of hot stones. Then there were wooden bowl masters. Tribes across the continent carved burl wood and thick tree trunks into bowls that lasted for years. The trick was finding the right wood, something that wouldn't crack when hot stones touched water. Maple and oak were popular. But carving without splitting the grain took real skill. What's strange is how creative people got with temporary containers. Some groups wove tight baskets from plant fibers and coated them with pine tar or clay mixtures to make them waterproof. Others folded large birch bark sheets into box shapes and sealed the corners. These one-time use containers were perfect for hunting trips or seasonal camps where carrying heavy clay pots wasn't practical. And don't forget steaming baskets. Native Americans discovered they could weave loose baskets designed to let steam escape while holding food in place. Place one over a pit filled with hot stones and wet leaves and you had a pressure cooker that would make modern chefs jealous. Durability was always a concern. Clay pots could crack if mishandled but lasted months or even years with proper care. Shell vessels were sturdy but eventually cracked. Wooden bowls were nearly indestructible but took forever to make. What's really impressive is how these natural containers shaped all the cooking styles. Different materials meant different heat distribution, flavors, and endless possibilities. But even the best pots couldn't solve one big problem: harsh winters when hunting was scarce and food needed to last. Ever wonder how tribes survived cold months without a single market in sight? The secret wasn't just catching food but making it last. They turned preservation into an art that would impress modern food scientists. Smoking was probably the most brilliant method invented. Tribes built special huts or shelters to hang strips of meat, fish, and even vegetables over slow-burning fires. The smoke did two incredible things at once: it dried out moisture that causes rot and coated everything in natural chemicals that kill bacteria. Think of it as nature's own protective spray, but it made food taste better instead of worse. But here's the clever part. Different tribes used different woods to create distinct flavors and preservation powers. Cedar gave fish a sweet, clean flavor. Walnut wood made deer meat taste like heaven. Oak gave the strongest protective effect. Some coastal tribes even used dried seaweed for fuel to give salmon a salty ocean aroma lasting months. Steaming also worked wonders. Tribes dug shallow pits lined with green leaves or animal hides, then dropped in heated stones. They added just enough water to create steam, piled in corn, roots, or meat chunks. The leaves kept everything moist while the steam gently cooked food perfectly. It wasn't just cooking, it was the first step toward creating durable food that could last longer without spoiling. Drying was just as essential. After a successful hunt, villages worked together to cut hundreds of pounds of meat into thin strips and hung them on wooden racks in sun and wind until they hardened like jerky. Maybe not quite, but close enough. Fruits got the same treatment. Wild blueberries, cranberries, and cherries were spread out on tree bark and left to concentrate nutrients. Some tribes ground dried fruit, mixed it with ground nuts and fat, and made pemmican, the world's first energy bars, which when stored properly could last for years. The amazing part is how much food they could preserve this way. Archaeological evidence shows some villages stocked more than 300 pounds of dried meat after a big hunt. That's enough protein to feed a family of 4 all winter long. Smart preservation made the difference between thriving and starving. But despite all this stored food, tribes had to stay flexible and adapt cooking methods as seasons changed. Native Americans weren't just great cooks, they were survival geniuses turning any season into dinner. When winter's harsh cold hit, northern tribes knew that slow-cooked stews weren't just comforting, they were life-saving. These meals packed maximum calories and kept bellies warm for hours. A smart move in freezing temperatures. Spring brought new challenges. Tribes gathered to follow game and find fresh fishing spots. Cooking tools had to be light, portable, and durable. Clay pots got left behind for lighter wooden bowls. Fire-starting kits became more important than fancy tools. Summers meant smoking hundreds of pounds of fish during peak seasons, storing calories for coming months. Think of it like original meal prep: failure meant hunger. The thing is, tribes shared secrets like old food bloggers. As Cherokee steaming techniques spread hundreds of miles north, coastal tribes traded shell-boiling tricks with inland groups. It wasn't just neighborliness, it was cultural evolution around campfires. Waste not want not attitudes thrived. Bones turned into broth, tools, and needles. Fish scales got ground into flour. Even intestines became grease storage bags. Nothing edible went unused or wasted. Weather dictated everything: fire placement, cooking times. Desert tribes cooked during cooler dawn hours. Arctic groups mastered indoor cooking without drowning in smoke. Every region developed methods based on what nature threw their way. Trade networks moved stones, clay, and techniques between tribes. Innovation spread faster than gossip at village meetings. True genius wasn't a single tech but the ability to adapt, improvise, and never miss a chance to eat well. These weren't just primitive people managing, they were culinary artists working with every natural resource to create flavors and preservation methods that fed communities for thousands of years. Their legacy lives on every time someone grills over an open flame or slow cooks in a cast iron pot. Please like my video, and if you want to see more videos about indigenous lives, remember to like and subscribe. Your likes help bring these stories to more people. Thank you all very much.